If you like to read, if you like to think, if you like to see the world differently, grab yourself a book, give this show a listen. Purple Lit Nerd gonna show you what you're missing. To the Purple Lit Nerd podcast for January the 28th, which was actually, this was supposed to be for January the 27th, but stuff and things and reasons. I am your host, the amazingly adorable Rebecca Thistle, podcasting to you live-ish for what will be the last time from my house, which I call Thistledale. So, yes, this is the last show that I am going to be doing, not only, well, one of the last shows that I'm going to be doing for, or at Thistledown, but I'm going to be doing, this is the last show that we're doing about American Gods, and I say we, like there's more than just me doing this show, so, if you count for all my multiple personas and moods, then yeah, we doing this show. So, before we go any further, just so you know, spoiler alert. If you have not read American Gods, preferably the 10th anniversary edition, but it really honestly doesn't matter because it's basically whatever edition you read is going to tell the same story. If you have not read American Gods, 10th anniversary by Neil Gaiman, and you care about spoilers, stop listening. Stop listening and stop listening now. Okay. So, this is going to be kind of a quick show. I had recorded a show, and then I went back and listened to it, and it went bleh. And then I got distracted, and stuff happened. So, what I want to talk about in this show, I mean, there's obviously a lot more, like, elements to this story, and theological / mythological references and stories and layers. There's a lot to this book, but I may do another series of shows on this like in a year. As for right now, I'm sort of like, okay, it's been 2.5 months, I'm done. So I'm going to talk about Bilquis. And in all seriousness, Bilquis is probably the least important character to the actual big story. And I mean, you could take out every single one of her chapters or little tidbits, not really chapters, but tidbits, every single one of her scenes, and it would still work. But I think she's important because she's sort of, she represents this idea of how, not just the idea, but the desperation that some of these old gods have been going or resorting to in order to survive, in order to gain worship. And I point specifically to her very first scene, which I don't know what it is to be a guy, but I have a feeling watching yourself being swallowed alive by a woman's vagina must be like the most terrifying thing in the world. Even more terrifying is how good it feels. I have a feeling Freud would have a lot to say about Neil Gaiman looking at that scene. So, I don't want to know. I don't want to know what Freud would say. I really don't want to think too much about it, but that is really, really, really creepy. But, as I say, Bilquis within the story itself is so useless, but so important, because she sort of represents what the old gods are facing, and what sentiments Wednesday is exploiting, really, when you think about it. And the irony of all this is how Bilquis gets her jollies, I guess you can say. And so to talk about exploitation with regards to Bilquis is sort of redundant. But Bilquis, if you didn't know, which, because I didn't when I first read the book, I was like, what the, who, Bilquis, what? Anyways, she is the Queen of Sheba. She is the manifestation of the belief in the Queen of Sheba as a supernatural being. The thing about the Queen of Sheba is she actually is prominent in multiple cultures and specifically 3 religions, major religions. You know, she pops up in all the Abrahamic religions because she. This is the full extent of how she pops up. Okay, this is the full extent. She has a meeting with King Solomon, and it is documented in one of the books in the Old Testament, and that's basically it. She, depending on which translation you're reading and you know which apocryphal texts and all this, the story goes one of 2 ways. Either, or one of many ways, but it basically comes down to Solomon sends for her and she shows up. Now, the actual story that kind of goes with that is, you know, some accounts say that she sent a bunch of slaves and jewels and gold. Some accounts say that she wound up being a consort. I don't know if you could really call her a concubine because she's the fucking Queen of Sheba, but, you know, for Solomon, and thus partially caused the downfall of Israel. Some people say she taunted him with 19 riddles and showed up 2 steps away from being naked, which means, like, oh my god, she's really sexy and comfortable in her sexuality, and fucking hell, she's got a brain. Dangerous woman. But the basic gist is, she met Solomon. That's all you need to know, in all seriousness. But when I was doing some research on her, there was this idea presented that in some cultures, potentially in Ethiopia, because there's some controversy, I guess you could say, about where Sheba actually was, and so some people say that it was in Ethiopia, and so she was like an Ethiopian queen, and anyways, but in some stories and in some belief systems, she is believed to be a jinn. Do not ask me how that's spelled. That's how it's pronounced by everyone that's pronounced it to me. It's a jinn, kind of like this half-demon, shape-shifting genie type thing. Jinn. So that the reason that that's interesting is there's one story of a jinn encountering a Middle Eastern salesperson who also happens to be homosexual in New York City. It's a cab driving jinn meets Middle Eastern salesperson. They end up hooking up, and the jinn steals the sales guy's identity for whatever inscrutable reason, and then nothing is said of it from there. I really hope that they cover that in the show. I haven't watched the show, as I have reiterated multiple times. I have not watched the show. But I really hope that, because that's the one part of American Gods that bothers me, is I'm like, what happened to the jinn? But here's here's the reason I bring it up in relation to Bilquis is because I kind of wonder if that djinn was actually Bilquis. And so that's why we never hear anything, because Bilquis took a red eye to New York, shapeshifted because she apparently has some kind of demonic powers, and drove a cab for a little while and seduced this Middle Eastern salesperson, stole his identity, and then flew back to Los Angeles to go back to being a hooker. I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's a really weird idea to have in your head. And now that I say it out loud, it's kind of, I feel better. It sounds weird and it sounds out there, but it really bothers me that you never hear anything, any resolution. What happened to the sales guy? Like, his identity was stolen, and then what? So funny things to think about. So, but that's basically Bilquis and her role in the story and her kind of background. The other thing I kind of wanted to put out there is just how varied the female roles are in this book, which I think is really good. You've got a lot of the female characters that are protective of Shadow. You've got or play some kind of protective role, I guess you could say, with Shadow. Obviously the Zorias, well, the Midnight Zorias specifically. I think that's Zoria Palunichnaya. I always mix their names up. I'm not good with Slavic names. Bast, to a certain extent, has a protective influence over him. Easter is protective of him. Obviously, Laura, his zombie wife, is extremely protective of him, almost as a means of redemption, but still, you know, it's genuinely protective of him. But then you've also, and then you've got this moment where girl Sam the hitchhiker tries to save him from the insanity of everything. But she's actually kind of more of like a person that challenges him. That says, look, you're not as clever as you think you are. And which is funny, because I never really see Shadow as thinking he's extremely clever. But, you know, she's the one that's whenever they've interacted, like, the couple of times that they do. Like, she's there to call him on his bullshit, and I really like that. Her half-sister, Marjorie, is wary of him, for good reason, mind you, but, you know, sort of eventually comes to a decision at some point that, oh, okay, you're not so bad. Here, let me hook you up with my sister in the hopes that she's not really a lesbian. Well, I mean, that's probably not what it was, but that's a possibility. But you've got these varied roles. You know, you've got Audrey, who has a much more adversary role, but it's an understandably adversary role because she doesn't know what's been going on. And you've got these goddesses that are not entirely enchanted by him. And so I really like how varied these female characters are. I can't even really think of, even the goddesses aren't that much of an archetype, to be honest with you. Maybe a little bit, but not really. But, yeah, it's, well, to me, anyways, that's the way that I see it. Maybe you see it another way, and that's fine. So, that's all I have to say about that. So, with that, if you would like to contact me on social media, the username to look for is PurpleBecca923. That's PurpleBecca 923. Please do not send me a message asking my name or my favorite color, because you should be able to deduce it from the username alone. Okay? Okie dokie. Anyways, that is the username to look for, PurpleBecca923. That is where I am on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. If you would like to email me, the